everyone. My name is Hema Parmar. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg News, and I'm pleased to lead today's fireside chat with TwoSigma's Chief Technology Officer, Jeff Wecker. Jeff joined $58 billion TwoSigma in July in the midst of the pandemic, and that's after spending 3 years at Goldman Sachs, where he built out the bank's data intelligence and data architecture teams, and was the bank's first chief data officer. Before Goldman, he spent 6 years at Bridgewater Associates, most recently as chief business architect. Jeff, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to begin this conversation. And for our audience, if you'd like to submit questions for Jeff, we'll have a bit of time at the end, so just put your questions in the chat function. So Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks to the Alpha Events people as well for inviting me. This is the longest waiting time in anticipation I've ever had for a conference, because originally we were going to have this last year, and I'm just so glad that we were able to get together today. So it's great. I'm sorry I can't see everybody in person, but it is great to be here with you all.
Awesome. So Jeff, you joined in the midst of a pretty crazy year last year with the pandemic, and I imagine you haven't met most of your colleagues in real life yet. Do you have a sense of what lies ahead for TwoSigma in terms of the firm's back to work plans?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. I haven't, there are very few of my colleagues that I've actually seen in person. So all they know is what you see right here, although I have to admit, it's the first time I'm wearing a jacket in all of COVID. But in any event, it's great to be here. Yes, I mean, we have decided that we'll be going back. We are going back in a limited capacity now and through the summer, but most people are really still working from home. Our expectation is that we'll be back formally in Q3, but obviously that's going to depend on the science, the availability of vaccines, and schools opening, local regulations, et cetera. But when we do return, we're going to trial a new hybrid model where we're going to require our people to be in the office 3 days a week and 2 days optional to work remotely. So we think that's going to be, we learned a lot, obviously, working from home and doing this. I certainly feel that the world's changed, and we're trying to accommodate our people as best we can by having a mixed environment, and hope that that works well.
So you said starting in the third quarter, around, is that September then?
Right after the September holiday, if all goes well, we'll be back in the office 3 days a week. Really, I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. I know that my team, I manage several hundred engineers, almost none of whom have seen me in person. So I hear they're taking up a pool on how tall I am.
I'm sure they're excited to see you too. And so you said this is a bit of a trial. Do you know how long you're going to do this 3-day in the office experiment for?
I mean, we're still talking about it, but we're going to try to do the trial for a good part of the school year to get used to it. There's quite a bit to work out. I mean, it's one thing when everybody is at home and everyone is remoting in, but when some of your folks are at home and some are in the office, there's a fair amount of preparation to make everyone feel that they have similar and fair and easy access to the experience. So there's a fair amount of technology investment that we need to make to really make it work for everybody.
So speaking of areas that you're going to be pushing ahead on, as you look through to the mark you want to make at TwoSigma, having been there now for about 9 months, what would you say are your top 3 priorities or top 3 areas that you're going to be focusing on, or 3 changes that you're looking to make at TwoSigma when it comes to data science and all data in that universe?
Sure. So a very large percentage of the TwoSigma staff are engineers or modelers and scientists, mathematicians. And so the most effective way I can make an impact and our team can make an impact is to ensure that the modelers have as easy a time as they possibly can when they're doing their research. So can they find the data? Are we bringing in and onboarding data fast enough? Are we making it relatively easy to do their research and then deploy their models into production for our computational pipelines? And similarly, our developers also have to find it relatively easy to ideate and then implement their ideas and deploy them as effectively as possible. So we're making a lot of investments in both of those. And then as TwoSigma has grown and continues to grow and scale, obviously we're spending a fair amount of time making sure that we run a reliable and secure platform, not only for research, but obviously importantly for the production platform as well.
So does that mean more investments in terms of dollars that you want to put to work in these areas, or hiring more staff, or changing of procedures?
Yes, and yes. We are hiring, and we're hiring pretty aggressively. We're pretty excited. We have a great contingent coming in to intern over the summer. We have new associates starting. We are active in in hiring experienced people as well at TwoSigma. But in addition to that, we're investing. Thankfully, my predecessor did a fantastic job with a lot of our distributed and cloud compute on a lot of the infrastructure scale, which set us up for this period excellently. But we're going to continue to invest, and we're going to continue to invest in the mathematics of finance and the science to really power the investment decisions that we have.
So last year was a pretty disappointing year for many quant firms. The data that they relied on historically didn't really prove effective in this once in a lifetime bizarre year that we've seen. How do you think quant firms and data-driven firms would or should reevaluate, or what's the biggest lessons that we can learn from this, so that in the future, if there's another once in a lifetime situation, you don't see the same kind of impact on returns and performance?
Mm-hmm. Well, every single market event you learn from. So certainly we had some pretty extreme market events last year, and the notion of regime shifts make a huge impact, and your ability to respond to it make a huge impact on your investing style when you're a systematic investor. So we learned a lot during that period. Some of the activity over the last year has been truly historic in the impact that it has had on markets. The activity of governments to try to improve our quality of life and to stimulate the economy certainly had a big impact. There's a lot going on, and that's really added to our data to learn and figure out models that react even better in the future. But there's always more to learn, and I have no doubt that the future will bring a lot more events that we're going to have to learn from. So hopefully not like the ones we just went through in terms of the pain and suffering that caused so many people, but at least for market decisions and market activity, I have no doubt that the future will continue to be vibrant as well.
But are there specific things that you might be looking to adjust to prepare TwoSigma to be better positioned in the future for something? Are there things that you're reevaluating?
I mean, we're always reevaluating. I think in the context of how we think about our business, it pays to be cautious, paranoid, skeptical, doubt whether you understand things. It keeps you sharp. It keeps you thinking about what you might have missed. We are, however, continuing to bring in more data. We're working a lot on our investment pipeline and analytics, as we always have been, and continuing to invest more there. And so I have no doubt that the future will be bright for us.
So as you look at more data, what kinds of data is the most attractive to you at this point? You know, we've seen satellite imaging, we've seen credit card data. It seems that as new types of data come to market, a lot of the firms grab it up. So what is the future? What is the horizon as you look forward? The kinds of data that is most useful or new or interesting to you?
I wish it was a simple silver bullet type of answer. You know, Hema, the most valuable data, and this is going to sound somewhat tautological, is the data that impacts the quality of our predictions as much as possible, and with high confidence. And what that actually is changes and changes frequently. You know, I do, however, and I certainly learned this during my tenure, you know, at multiple places. Data has a life cycle. It goes from when a new data set becomes available, it goes from being unique, and to the extent that it adds value in your modeling process, if you're the first mover to understand that value, you derive some benefit. And then as that opportunity gets crowded with more and more smart people looking at the data set, you see a decay rate in any one data set making a specific impact. But the combination of data sets can be quite unique. And so eventually what happens with data is so many people are using it to factor it into their thinking about investments and investment value that while its marginal contribution to value is fairly small, we all are in a position where if it's still impacting value and everyone's using it, then we all have to use it. And so it becomes more of a commodity, but that doesn't mean you stop using that data, which I'm sure pleases most of the vendors that provide those kinds of data sets. But, you know, I think that one of the exciting things that's happening right now is that so many new and novel data sets are coming to market. Companies that previously had private caches of data are thinking about how to monetize the value of their data. As you know, was my job at Goldman, was to really think a lot about monetizing the value of data held internally. So you know, given that, I think that it's a pretty exciting time for those of us in this field, because we get a chance to look at a lot of different data sets, think about their value, test them, and integrate them into our investment processes.
Can you give us some examples of types of data sets that are being monetized that are newer on the market?
Newer on the market. Well, a lot of alt data. I won't give away any secrets here because we have some really smart people in the audience, but you know, there's been quite a lot of alt data of late, and the scale of alt data has certainly taken a turn. It's gotten a lot larger. So you have data sets like credit card data that has been touted in the news actively. You have data sets like geolocation, geospatial data, location where people are, spatial, what's on the ground from the air. There's a lot of new data sets in ESG, you know, and even the nature of data sets are changing. If you think about credit card transaction and search data, the explosion and acceleration of sensitivity to privacy is really changing that space radically to one where permissioning rights are being granted back to the creator of the creators of that data, the consumers, and that's going to change the nature of a lot of data sets as well. So I think the alt data space is pretty exciting. I think as new networks of IoT devices also come to market. The ability to look at leading and lagging indicators of market prices by looking at what's happening further up the supply chain and in the economic marketplace also creates a lot of opportunity.
And so if everyone is relying on the same data sets or sources of data and are on the horizon looking at new sources, what are ways in which you can distinguish yourself from the others? I imagine it's in how you use the data, but what approaches are critical in order to do that?
Yes. So, I wish there were an easy formula. We have a lot of people doing pretty hard work to look at new data sets, to trial them, to try to understand their impact. We do a lot of work on the relationship among data sets as well. But research is a painstaking process, excuse me, and it takes time. And so what helps us certainly is the scale of our operation. We have a lot of people working on different data sets. We have a program as well where we have an expandable workforce where we work with those in the greater data science community as well to make contributions, whether those contributions are new models or engineering new features on our behalf. And so a research laboratory is a pretty systematic process where you try a lot of things, you find things that show some promise, and then you work pretty carefully to refine them. What we do, as I was saying earlier on the technology side, is we work pretty hard to make the ingest of data and the discovery of new data sets is seamless and as frictionless as possible. We have a number of investments externally as well. We're a large investor in Crux Informatics. They help us with some of the more commoditized end of our work, helping us just simplify the data ingest process and make it relatively easy for us to set up the initial end of the pipelines that we pull in, both for research and for production.
And you mentioned before that you are hiring and expanding your talent. What are the biggest challenges when it comes to attracting talent, and what sorts of pools are you going to? Are you going to any atypical sources now?
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge in talent is we're not the only organization motivated by our ability to create new data insights. So we're competing quite actively, and we don't only compete in the financial services space with other firms like ourselves. We compete quite actively with technology companies as well for tech talent. And so we have really grown where we look for talent. We recruit from a very large list of schools, a very large list of different degree programs. We've really made a significant investment recently on our diversity and inclusiveness program to reach out to many more schools and continue to search for talent that way. And then also, as I've said, we're looking at less conventional ways to source talent by reaching out to the part-time community through programs like our Alpha Studio program, which is a storefront that we use, or a digital storefront that we use for connecting to part-time researchers and data scientists to help us as well. So we have a pretty extensive program to bring in the talent that we need. But at the end of the day, talent is the scarcest commodity. And so working through the practice of finding the best people, finding people that would fit really well within our culture and bringing them in, onboarding them. Onboarding is particularly unusual. We've had to make some changes, obviously, in the last year for myself and for a lot of new new hires that we make. There's a lot of components to it, but I feel pretty confident that our HR and our recruiting team is doing a fantastic job reaching out to new areas for us.
So we've talked about a few different types of data. Are there certain types of data that are more effective, and what, if anything, is overhyped?
Overhyped. I mean, there's certainly data that's more effective. I mean, at its simplest, there is data that is core and core and a commodity, but our approach to integrating it has changed over the years. So price data, market microstructure data certainly is foundational. Securities terms, entity data, certainly foundational data. You can't run this kind of business without that kind of data. But beyond that, economic data, I was describing flows of funds, what investors are doing, news streams, social media. I mean, the whole gamut of data has various gems buried within it. And so the goal is really thinking through how you get a well-diversified set of data. Look for that data that is are leading indicators of price behavior or value behavior, and ensuring that you have the ability within your network of models to respond to events, respond to regime shifts, and be willing to change the models affecting your investment decisions quickly should the world change.
And things that are overhyped, that are not as useful?
Overhyped.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, data, like everything else, tends to be a bit faddish. So there have been ups and downs on geolocation data. There have been ups and downs on credit card data. And I think if you go back to what I was saying earlier about this life cycle, where a data set might create a lot of value and then decay relatively rapidly, and then the next, exhibits the behavior similar to a hyping, of a data set being overhyped. So most new data sets are marketed pretty heavily when they become available, and then to the extent that they add value, we'll use them, but often that initial value after it decays requires another pass and a lot more thoughtfulness to extract the contribution that a given data set or stream of data might use.
We have a question from the audience that I'll get to. The question is, how do you easily describe your models to investors for gaining their trust? As a data scientist, I find this to be the hardest part of implementing a model. My accuracy may be great, but if the traders I support can't understand it, it's lost. Good point.
Yes. Fortunately, I'm a technologist, and most of my focus is on making sure that the technology, that the models, that our ability to do that research and to deliver that research into our investment decisions is done excellently. I really rely on our client relationship people to spend the time with investors. But from time to time, we invite investors in, and we talk to them about what we're doing and how we're investing in technology and what's working, what's not working. And but trust, I don't profess to be an expert on gaining trust. I'm somewhat old-fashioned in that respect. I believe that you earn trust over a period of time when you do what you say you're going to do, and you're straight with people about the pros and cons of your techniques. And over time, coupled with solid returns at reasonable risks, you earn investor trust.
See how allocators, certainly some of them may be cautious about investing into a black box type fund or a fund that they don't understand or don't have clarity into.
Mm-hmm. So I can certainly see that for a new fund or a new process, it takes time. It takes a fair amount of time, and I think that part of what takes the time is to understand for new funds whether the idea is spurious or the idea and the strategy is fleeting, or the fund, the investment team has the research discipline to continue to develop their ideas, their theories, and continue to come up with strategies that work. And so in that context, I think that does favor those firms that have the scale of a lot of different researchers, but it definitely comes with time. If you do what you say you're going to do and you have a thoughtful scientific discipline. I think what's interesting in the world today is people have a lot of patience for data science. It's not just happening in finance, it's happening in many different industries. And if you're willing to take the time and be patient to explain it, quite a few people everyone certainly that I come into contact with wants to understand and is willing to take the time to learn what we do.
We have a couple more questions that I'll get to. Our next one is, could you tell us what are some of the new technologies you guys are excited about and are putting to work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, not to give anything away, but we are spending a lot of time in various learning algorithms and techniques in artificial intelligence. We're obviously have a broad investment there. I must say that that work is pretty painstaking to develop capabilities that work and are reliable. But we've had some good response there. We're doing a fair amount of work with unstructured data as well that we're pretty pleased with, whether that's text or news streams. So that's working well. Some of the data sets that are starting to be available that I'm pretty hopeful about are ESG, climate, weather risk data. Personally, I'm a co-founder and advisor of a climate risk company that has been created over the last few years. So I'm pretty excited about what's emerging. I also think that our ability to really scale computation in the cloud to solve more and more sophisticated and complex problems at scale more quickly so that we can get an edge in investing has certainly paid off for us. So, but that to name a few.
Our next question is, if you could give, and you've touched on it a bit, but if you could give some real examples of data sets across different financial service domains and how mature your analysis is. This person says, you've mentioned credit card data as it pertains to retail, but they're asking about wealth management, investment banking, and portfolio management, equity research, risk management is some areas.
Right. So, well, I named a few ideas, certainly in ESG. There's some real opportunities there. I think we have to be, mature. So the question really about how mature our analysis is, not to be somewhat joking about it, but I think our analysis is mature if our predictions are integrated into our investment process and generate value. If it's not, then perhaps it's not so mature. You know, in terms of data sets that are valuable, certainly increasingly news streams and social media streams have value there, but it's a pretty challenging process to filter out fake signals in certain streams. So I think that the research, there's a pretty good body of research on filtering fake news, and I think you'll see more and more of that with time. So I think that's a pretty interesting area. I think that other interesting areas, certainly, as I said, are companies that are exposing data for the first time, I think has a lot of potential. You know, you have to be careful, in part because you know, you want to avoid data that crosses into personal privacy. Those domains are and frankly should be off limits, as is obviously material non-public information. But outside of those obvious areas, you know, it's hard to predict what data is what particular data set is useful. I don't tend to think about this problem as any one data set, but a complement of data sets that have relationships in different regimes. If you think about an individual investor is reading a lot of news, watching a lot of data, and what might be more heavily weighted might change as the market activity changes, and models have to reflect that as well.
Can you tell us how much more money you plan to put to work on, to spend on data sets next year?
Data sets next year.
Oh, sorry, this year.
Well, yeah, I mean, over the next year. Not really. We have a pretty aggressive program for identifying new data sets and ingesting them. You know, all of the businesses at TwoSigma derive value from differentiated data insight. And so if you think about the top of the data pyramid as being the investment decisions, and those investment decisions depend on model predictions, which obviously depend on models and underlying features and a whole swath of derived data, starting with raw data. We need to be pretty aggressive at looking at all potential sources of raw data. So while it's hard to predict the exact amount on new data subscriptions, because it ebbs and flows with the data marketplace is growing and shrinking at all points in times. We don't want to find out, we certainly want to be one of the first to find out that a new data set has value. So we're pretty aggressive at looking at data sets that are available in the marketplace. We also, I think, are pretty focused, as I said earlier, on improving the efficiency and reducing the friction in the research and production pipelines. Because what we find happens, you know, one way to think about that is that 80% of almost every 80, I don't know if the right number is 70, 90, 60, but the lion's share of almost every computer science project is marshaling, wrangling, and cleansing and presenting data. And if our researchers are doing too much of that, then they're not doing research. So the way we get leverage is by investing quite heavily in reducing as much of the repetitive activity as we can. So the people that come up with ideas and the people that are doing the research can spend their time experimenting, looking at results, and thinking about the impact. And so a small amount of money applied on that problem has a multiplier effect on our yield in terms of data impact.
One more question from the audience is, has TwoSigma tried to use artificial intelligence technology like AlphaGo?
So I'm not going to get into the specifics of what technologies we use. I thought that AlphaGo was more about playing Go and playing chess. But look, all kidding aside, I think we use a lot of different ideas across the space of machine learning. Um, uh, the the academic journals are rich with ideas. Figuring out which ones are really relevant to our practice takes time, takes trial, takes thinking about the nature of the problem we're trying to solve. So we've used a lot of different capabilities in terms of the research ideas. And from time to time, we also integrate external technologies as well.
Um, but without naming specific products, artificial intelligence as a whole, is that an area that you're pushing into or growing into, or is that something you're doing currently?
Well, the term is so loosely applied
Sure.
to so many types of activities and so many types of behavior. So I would say that there are plenty of things that we're doing to build models and train models that certainly fit the term artificial intelligence. And a number of years ago, but those same activities fit the term data science. A number of years ago, those same activities fit the term statistical methods in finance. So yes, I mean, I think it's very easy to get enamored by the term artificial intelligence or machine learning. And it's really important to remember that these are just tools. They're tools in the toolbox. Don't confuse the tools with what you're trying to build. So when you're trying to solve a problem in insight, and it would be remiss not to really do your research and think about what's the best path to solving the particular problem that you're solving. And looking at new techniques certainly does contribute quite a bit to opening up new branches of opportunity for us.
We have just a few minutes left, but I'm going to try and get a couple more questions in from our audience. One more is, has it been a complex challenge for you to access and manage elastic cloud resources for research? Do you also use Elastic Cloud for running production models?
Yes, well, it is certainly a complex challenge to use a distributed compute. I would say that there are a lot of overlapping capabilities, but let me first start by taking my hat off to my predecessor, who really did a lot of work in TwoSigma with just a wonderful set of engineers that are focused on distributed compute, distributed containerized compute, and using the instantaneous or near instantaneous access to a virtually limitless supply of compute nodes to help power a lot of the computation that we do. So it has been a challenge. A lot of the work that we've invested in is designed to reduce the complexity so that researchers have access to scalable containerized compute and are less concerned about whether that is on-prem, in the cloud, or a hybrid. So, sort of gone are the years or the days, at least for us, where you do the work to build your cluster and map, if you're a researcher, and you have to put together some map reduce problems. We've streamlined a lot of that so that compute and compute capabilities can be deployed easily without worrying about all of those issues that turned individual researchers into every type of programmer there was, infrastructure expert, scheduling expert, orchestration expert over the years. And what we're trying to do is return researchers back to what they do best, which is thinking of the next great idea that they want to test in the marketplace, use it, and then make it easy for them to deploy that into our investment decision making.
Does reinforcement, this is another question from the audience, does reinforcement learning play a role in your research for creating trading strategies?
Look, there's a lot of different branches of machine learning that are pretty interesting. I personally think reinforcement learning has a lot to offer in this space, but so do a lot of other techniques. So,
yes,
well, no, what I would say, what I would say is it's pretty early days, and we're doing a lot of research to figure that out.
To determine your analysis of
determine its value.
Okay, I've got the green light to go a few minutes over, so we'll get to one or two more questions from the audience. What's the current process to sourcing and prioritizing which data sets you look at?
That's a great question, and it is a question we give a lot of thought to. You know, we spend a lot of time on data strategy, and usually what happens in the process is a researcher thinks about the data that they want to explore to solve a problem, and we either have that data or we don't. Increasingly, it's getting easier and easier because we have a lot of data. So, and so we try to make that data that we have as discoverable as possible so that researchers know what's already in-house. To the extent it's not in-house, we have a queue and a prioritization queue. If we hear similar ideas from multiple researchers, it goes up the queue. Because we're trying to find data that helps lots of people. I wish there were a magic formula to this. We spend a lot of time talking about the prioritization of our queue, and while, you know, we're also investing heavily to reduce the latency required to onboard and make a new data set ready for evaluation. As I said, I mentioned a use of Crux as well earlier, but the demand always exceeds the capacity to ingest data. So, so we have a review board internally that prioritizes data sets. And so sometimes the sequence of the queue isn't a strict first come, first serve basis. We resort the queue to align with the firm's strategic objectives and aligns with our collective senior researchers' belief as to what will likely yield the most value.
Do you use any third parties to verify the provenance or legality of your external data, or do you do that work yourself? It's a good question.
You know, I don't know a lot about the details of legality of external data, but I can assure you that every data set that we consider goes through our legal and compliance process to ensure that we have appropriate entitlement to use it. And so I leave that to the experts to protect us on that.
Excellent. Well, thank you to our audience for the plethora of really interesting questions, and to Jeff for spending his time sharing his insights with us today. This has been, you know, we appreciate your time and your thoughts, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be with all of you. Hopefully sometime in the future we can do all of this in person, but be safe. And I look forward to meeting you in the near future.
Thanks, Jeff.